It may be the most addictive toy in history, and it's definitely the hottest thing this Christmas. Nintendo video games.
By 1990, the Nintendo Entertainment System had been on the scene in North America for going on 5 years. By this point in time, it was a household staple that had revolutionized the video game market. Tons of classic games had been released on the NES by this point, but developers were really starting to figure out how to maximize the potential of the console. The NES had many great years, but one in particular really stands out in the crowd: 1990. In today's episode, we want to take a look at what we believe is the greatest year for the Nintendo Entertainment System. Today we dive into 1990 on the NES. The NES had so many amazing years,
Yes.
Tons of classic games. Nintendo is still milking those udders. Today in 2023, you know, the NES app on the Switch,
Yes.
right? The NES Classic a few years back, a lot of years back now, actually, when you really think about it. But when we were doing some research on just the history of the NES, a year just jumped out head and shoulders above the rest.
Yeah.
And that year was 1990.
1990. We think 1990 was the best year for the Nintendo Entertainment System.
Yeah.
Obviously, the launch year is always going to be a good year.
Yeah, 85, yep.
But so this is like 5 years later, which is absolutely insane. But the amount of games that came out, we're going to cover a few of them. Obviously, there's a ton of games that came out.
Yeah.
But then there's accessories that came out, and even there's games that almost came out in 90. But they were they were in 89.
They were on the cusp. And I think
that helps 90 be even better. You know, that helps sales and stuff.
Yeah, before we dive into it, I do want to say that this is all based on North American releases.
Yes.
And we wanted to do that because that's where we grew up, right? That was our perspective. And having lived through it myself, you were born a little bit later, but having lived through it, I wanted to focus on the North American releases.
Yeah.
And, you know, some of the dates and things like that are a little dodgy when you dig into this older time frame. The record keeping on the NES is a little goofy.
The history of the NES is hard to find, especially like when things were released and it's all over the board. When you get into later consoles, it's obviously easier, but it's kind of hard. So we just kind of did research and found what we thought was the dates, and that's what we're going with. So some of these might be off, but I think they're like, I'm 90% sure that these are correct. And I was born in 94, so 90, I wasn't even a thought yet.
Yeah.
But I've grown up and appreciated the NES so much. It's like one of my favorite consoles of all time.
It was the first console you ever played.
It's the first console I ever played, and I played it like in 98 because my mom had one.
Yeah.
So I love the NES. We have so many NES games in here. We play the NES all the time on the channel in our free time. It's such a great console. And 90, dude, the games that were released, I think we just got to jump into the games because it's insane to think about just in a year's time, 12 months, all the games that were released. It's wild. You know, so we're going to go chronologically, and we're only going to cover like the dingers. You know, there is a ton of other games.
And we could miss one of your favorites, and it could be a great game.
Yeah, but these are in our perspective, the dingers that came out in 1990, starting in January of 1990 in North America. River City Ransom.
Yeah.
Fantastic freaking game. This game is so good that they put it on the Switch app, the NES Switch app, which is pretty cool.
It was one that I think a lot of people felt like was missing from the NES Classic.
Yes.
And, you know, it's a game that has stood the test of time. It's one that does get talked about still.
Yeah,
on
people
the
talk
regular.
about this game all the time.
Yeah. Then the next game that came out that we want to highlight from January was Double Dragon 2.
Ooh,
and
this was a revolutionary game.
it was because Double Dragon 1, if you guys remember, that was only a one-player game. Double Dragon 2, now it's two-player.
Yeah, they introduced co-op into it.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people that grew up with the NES have nostalgia. I think you have nostalgia for the first one.
Yeah.
It's a great game. But the second one is incredible. Co-op, I think the second one is better.
Yeah.
But I prefer co-op games. So that could be why. But this Double Dragon 2 is a fantastic game. And this is also another one that is on the Switch and it's on the NES Classic.
Yeah.
When they were looking at what games should we put on the NES Classic, this was one of them. Came out in 1990.
It's an icon. Double Dragon 2 is an icon, unequivocally. It's a beat 'em up. I mean, they're still releasing modern versions of Double Dragon.
Yeah, they are.
In 2023.
Yeah,
even try using the old style graphics. A game that has stood the test of time. Is it the best beat 'em up of all time? Absolutely not, but it's a really freaking good beat 'em up.
It's a really good one, and then we move on to February, which is one of the biggest releases, I think, for the NES. This game is phenomenal. Super Mario Bros. 3.
Yep.
This introduced the overview map, revolutionary in Mario games, because they went on to do that in Mario World, you know. Fantastic game. 1990, Super Mario Bros. 3, arguably one of the best Mario games on the NES, or is the best Mario game on the NES. This game is so amazing, and it's another one on the NES Classic. And it's on the NES for the Switch. You know?
Mario 3 was a game changer. Mario, the first Mario Brothers, Super Mario Brothers, that is great in its own right. And Mario 2, I love the game, but it's that weird.
It's weird.
The version we got in North America is just goofy. I love the game though.
It's a great game.
Yeah, it's just very, very unique. And man, if you could just perfect what they were doing with Mario 3, and I really think Mario 3 has a fighter's chance to be the best Mario game of all time.
Yeah.
I mean, it is that good, and we don't want to beat, that drum anymore, because there's another release in February that I think is so important as well. And it's not on the NES Classic or the Switch, but
you can't get it anywhere except
Sunsoft.
for the Sunsoft release, Batman.
Yes.
One of my favorite NES games of all time. Mario 3 is up there too, I didn't say that, but Batman is fantastic. It's only a single player game, but we can take turns. You know, it's so good. It's fantastic. The music. I listen to the soundtrack of this game all the time. Yeah. The soundtrack is incredible. The gameplay is incredible. The freaking wall jumps, the tools, or the weapons.
I love
fantastic.
that you bring up the wall jumps, because, dude, I just that's how wall jump mechanics should work.
It's like the perfection of wall jumps. This game is so good. If you're a Batman fan, you should play this game if you haven't. Even if you're not a Batman fan, you should play this game if you haven't.
You know, the wall jumping in this game, when I got my hands on this game, it fucked me up in Ninja Gaiden.
In Ninja Gaiden, it's different. Why don't you play like Batman?
Yeah.
Like you're comparing it to Batman.
It's going to be hard to beat the month of February. I mean, you get Super Mario 3.
Can you imagine being a kid in 1990 and these two games, like there's probably commercials playing, and they're like, "Oh, Mom, can you give me 2 games?"
Yeah.
No. Mom's gonna say no to that.
Let the battle begin.
Super Mario Bros. 3's and oh man, if you were a kid and you got those, you'd be on cloud nine.
You know, Keaton's Batman from '89 was blowing up. It was one of the biggest movies
in the
world.
One of the biggest movies. Yeah, that was fantastic.
You had that Batman.
And then there's a little bit of a gap. There's obviously games that came out obviously on NES, but for dingers, we're gonna jump all the way to April.
Yeah.
So February to April with Snake's Revenge. This game is decent. It's fine, but if you're a fan of Metal Gear, I think it's worth talking about.
Yeah, released by Ultra, and this game does get a little bit of hate, but one thing I do really appreciate about this game is it is kind of the blueprint for what we've seen on Metal Gear Solid 1. That isometric view. Now, there are some stages or parts of stages where you kind of get into a side-scrolling element, but for the most part, you've got that overhead view, and the way the game plays is just... If you've played it and you've played the original Metal Gear, you're like, whoa, they were so close to really, really figuring this out. Can I say it's a all-time classic or a great game? No, but as a Metal Gear fan, I love Snake's Revenge.
It's pretty cool. What's really weird to me, and this could be a separate episode or in a separate discussion too, is how did Metal Gear start on the NES and then all of a sudden go to PlayStation?
It just disappears and then it reappears. And it felt, many people I think Metal Gear Solid is the beginning.
Yeah, but there's 2 other games.
Yeah, well, there's actually even more that were like PC.
PC.
Yeah.
That's what I don't want to get is like, oh, it was an NES game because it was an Ultra game, and then all of a sudden it's Konami on the PlayStation.
Yeah,
that's really weird. But maybe the 64 could imagine Metal Gear Solid on the 64. That would have sucked.
I can't even. Well, that's a whole nother video. We already ruffled feathers there. And then we bounce into the Adventures of Lolo 2.
Yeah, the second one.
Yeah, I've only ever played the first, so I don't have any.
Yeah, I've never played the second one, but the first one is incredible.
Yeah,
the first one's really good, and then again in April we got 3 games coming out. Super C. You a fan of Contra? Super C, fantastic, great run and gun co-op game, and another game from 1990 that's on the NES Classic. This game is not on the Switch, I think because Konami released their own collections, and we'll talk about that later with some other games. But Super C, a freaking staple on the NES.
It is, and I think it perfected what Contra did. It did it so well. You know, I've said on the channel before, I still prefer the original Contra, but that's not because of any scientific method. It's just driven by nostalgia.
Yeah.
That was my
That was the game you had to play. Yeah.
Super C though is fantastic, and I think there's a reason that game ended up on the NES Classic and not Contra, which that still bothers me.
It is weird that the OG isn't on there.
Yeah,
but I think a lot of people that are fans of Contra, Super C is up there on.
Yeah,
one of the best.
I get it. And again, there's more games that were released in April. These are just the highlights, because this video can't go on for freaking 2 days, right?
We can't talk about every single game released in 1990, but now we're gonna jump into May with another freaking staple on the NES, Ninja Gaiden 2.
Yeah.
The second one. Oh my god.
And this is, by 90, the classics I feel like have been established, but now we are refining them.
Yes.
And I think your nostalgia probably goes to like, I don't know, dude, the original Ninja Gaiden's my game. Dude, Ninja Gaiden 2, that's good, and I can't say I like it more than the first one, but in the same vein of what I said about Contra and Super C, I have to apply that same
It's because
logic.
you had the first one, and you have nostalgia for the first one, but the second one is still a fantastic game.
Yeah.
It's so wild that we're getting all these sequels and all this stuff that are just like, these are like becoming the best in the series, in some people's minds in 1990.
Yeah.
I already brought it up once, but I can't even imagine being a kid. Like every month you're getting all these games.
Oh, your parents would be like, dude, shut your mouth.
Yeah. Go outside. Quit playing video games. And then we move on to June. In June, they release a little game called Chip 'n Dale's Rescue Rangers. Ever heard of it?
Yeah, this
Freaking
is
classic.
in a long line of great Capcom games that are licensed, Disney-type titles. And there was a second one of this game, but this is some people, the music in this game in particular. I didn't play this game as a kid. I don't have that huge nostalgia push
for it, but I played it as an adult, and I do like it.
Yeah,
it's a good game.
It's very good. It definitely is worthy of being on our list, but it's one that I think grabbed a lot of kids' attention. And has a lot of nostalgia for a lot of people.
It's pretty cool, like back in the day, thinking about, video games, and then they're bringing in these IPs and like Disney into games. Like, back in the day, you didn't really think about that. Nowadays it's everywhere and all that stuff.
Here's what they say.
Way cool. Definitely rad.
You'll help Chip and Dale escape their enemies and rescue their good friend Gadget.
Definitely awesome. All right. Absolutely nuts. Ouch.
Play Disney's Rescue Rangers game for Nintendo by Capcom. Also, look for adventures in the Magic Kingdom.
Yes. It's hot.
Now moving on to July. This game is really cool. This game is available on the NES Switch app, Crystalis.
Yeah.
This game is really cool.
Yeah, for sure. I can't even remember the developer on this. Is it SNK?
We'll have it on the screen.
I can't remember. We'll see. We'll pop it up. But just a staple. It's a staple. There's a reason people still talk about it to this day. But a bigger release in July.
Yeah.
That really, for a lot of people, started it all. And was, for a lot of people, the first RPG they ever played. Final Fantasy.
Final Fantasy. Have you ever heard of it? The biggest series ever.
Yeah.
People love Final Fantasy.
Yeah.
I'm not a big RPG guy, so I never got into it, but I know people love this series. The OG came out in 1990 in July, and this is another one that they knew this game was so popular. It's on the NES Classic.
Yeah.
Like Final Fantasy. People are still talking about. I mean, there's so many different games, but they're still talking about this and this series today.
Yeah, we're getting new ones, we're getting remakes of old ones, we're getting re-releases of old ones, all sorts of stuff around this series.
It started in 1990
in July
on the NES, which is absolutely wild.
Okay, so now we're just wrapping up July. We got the back half of the year, and business is just starting to pick up. Okay,
we're just getting started.
So in September we get Castlevania 3: Dracula's Curse.
Oh my God, Castlevania 3 is such a good Castlevania game. I think a lot of people like the first one more just because of nostalgia, but 3, incredible.
And it's kind of weird. I've always thought it was a little unique that the Super Mario Brothers went to Mario 2, and people were like, what the hell's going on here?
It happened with Castlevania.
And then 3, but the same type of trajectory happened.
Yeah, because
Simon's Quest.
It's weird and kind of frustrating.
Because if you don't, the game's broke essentially, until you figure out what you need to do. But Castlevania 3 is epic. my nostalgia, I could use the same argument for a lot of things. Castlevania 1's always near and dear to my heart, but I can't even make an argument that it's better than Castlevania 3.
Yeah.
Just a huge freaking, such an awesome game.
3 is phenomenal. There was another release in September that's really cool. Journey to Silius. This game is available on the NES Switch app, which is cool. It's not on the Classic, but this is another freaking awesome game. But I think a lot of people were playing Castlevania during this era.
And one thing I like about this game, and I didn't find this out till later in life, is this game was developed and built to be a Terminator game.
Whoa, and then they couldn't get the rights or something?
They lost the licensing.
Oh, that's really cool. So it technically is a Terminator.
Yeah, so they had to then walk it back and create, a story and a new name and all those things. So
that's really cool. Now let's move on to October of 1990, releasing one of my favorite games of all time, Dr. Mario.
Yeah.
A puzzle game to compete with Tetris, Nintendo's way to compete with Tetris. Dr. Mario, this is a staple on the NES. It's on the NES Classic, and it's on the NES Switch app. I love this game so much, and it's just so simple. The music, it's fantastic. I think a lot of... This wasn't a game kids wanted, I don't think.
Yeah.
But as an adult and fans of like puzzle games, I love this game. It's so good.
I've told the story before on the channel, but I remember renting this game thinking, it's a Mario game, right? I'm going to run around and be jumping, platforming, and throwing pills at people or something.
Pills.
I got home. I was like, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years old, and I was like ready to cry. I was like, what did I just rent?
Yeah, because it's a Mario game where it's like not a Mario game.
Yeah, but later in life, dude, and your passion around it, it is hot take. I like it more than Tetris.
I like it more than Tetris too. I don't think it's a hot take. I think it's way better. The music's better.
Yeah.
The gameplay's better.
It's not as iconic for most people, but Dr. Mario is the jam.
Yeah, and that started, a whole franchise of other Dr. Mario games.
Yeah.
Obviously, they haven't touched it in a while, but the last one I think was on the Wii U.
Yep.
So that's still kind of relevant, but I still prefer the OG over all the ones they made. It's fantastic. Now moving on to November of 1990.
A Capcom month.
Yeah, you ever heard of a game called Mega Man? Mega Man 3 came out.
Yeah.
Fantastic. I know a lot of people love the second one.
Yeah.
But the third one is still a really good game.
Yep.
It's fantastic, If you're a fan of Mega Man, this is wild, dude. The third one came out in 90.
Yeah, and then one of my favorite Capcom games comes out right after that or in the same month. I don't know in chronological order. We have them in alphabetical order here. But Noid.
Way different than Mega Man.
The Noid.
Domino's Pizza.
He's slinging the Domino's Pizza. I got his action figure back up over here. We'll throw a little B-roll in there. I don't know why I like this game. I think I like this game because I loved the commercials.
The commercials sold it.
Yeah.
But that's what's cool about this era is they're making commercials and they're selling it to kids, and man, the Noid commercials, the game is actually really good.
Yeah.
Surprisingly.
Yeah.
For being a Domino's
pizza
guy. Game.
Yeah.
Like, what is it?
Yeah.
But Capcom behind it, it's a good game.
Sorry, Noid. Call for new Domino's Pan Pizza. Nobody delivers better.
So December, this was a big deal. I remember when I rented this as a kid, being just so happy. Because as a kid, I really didn't care for the Turtles game on the NES.
Yeah,
the first
one, yeah.
As I grew older and I figured it out, I don't mind the game. But Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, the arcade game on the NES, hammer.
Here we go. This game is fantastic. This is another staple on the NES.
I love that they put the arcade game in there because you were like, oh, so this is the one that I play in the arcade.
Yeah.
Obviously, it was dumbed down a little bit, but it's a really freaking good entry. It's not as good as the next one that came in the entry, or on the NES, the Manhattan Project or whatever. But
the arcade game is really good. And then the last game we're going to talk about in the games list of 1990 for the NES is Star Tropics. This game is phenomenal. This game is on the NES Classic, and it is on the NES on the Switch, which is so cool. They know that this is a staple for the NES library.
Yeah, so this is a game that never really landed for me, so I've beat it. But it's not a game I ever care to go back to. And I don't know what makes a game fall into that category for me, because a lot of these on the list, I could pop in Noid, Turtles, Snake's Revenge, but I've just been there, done that with Star Tropics. It's fine. I understand why it's so heavily regarded, and I do think it deserves to be in this list we're reading off. But I don't love it.
Yeah, I don't have any nostalgia, obviously, because I wasn't born yet. But I think it's a fine game. And then there is another game, but it's kind of a weird game that we do need to mention because it's really cool. And that's the 1990. This is the first time they did this. The 1990 Nintendo World Championships. This is a big deal, especially if like you're a nostalgic person for the NES and you're a collector for the NES. You know all about this game.
Yeah, well, and it was a big event.
Massive
they
event.
showcased it, even in the movie preceding 90. But the first Nintendo World Championships occurred in 1990.
Yeah, which is that's a big deal. 5 years after the console was released.
Yeah, and I don't know all the details about it, but I know it was a lot centered around Mario 3 and all that type of stuff. And the movie The Wizard,
which we'll talk about in a
yeah,
little
it's
bit.
kind of a little bit of an advertisement for this event or whatever, but really cool time. And if you're a collector, you know that, man, if you can find anything with that Nintendo World Championship printed on it, whether it's a patch or a jacket or a shirt or
that's cool,
the cartridge or the original, and the repro market's gone insane. You can get a repro copy of the World Championships cart for pennies on the dollar compared to like an original
and
one.
The original one is super hard to find.
Yeah.
But if you just want to get a repro just to have it, just to kind of experience what they did back in the day, you can get that.
Very neat.
It's kind of cool that 1990 they started it. Like that feels a little late to me to start like a championship thing.
Yeah, but I think it just speaks to the momentum they had.
Yeah, which is wild. So out of the games we talked about in 1990, obviously there's a ton of others.
Yeah.
6 of the games we talked about are on the NES Classic. That means 6 of the 30. So 6 of the 30 came out in 1990.
Yeah.
That is insane.
And
That's
they
a
were
massive
releasing
amount.
games, I think, through 94 for the NES.
Damn.
So
they almost had a
in
10
9
year.
years, 6 of the 30 happened in 1 year.
That's pretty impressive.
And that's other people's opinions. People selecting the game. Not our opinion.
Yeah.
That's just the facts, right?
Yeah. That's pretty cool. Now I kind of want to talk about close calls because there was a few things that didn't make the list because they were released at the tail end of '89.
So yeah, this all kind of festers like around this pocket, and I think before we filmed, you talked about how years seem so much longer when we were kids, and you kind of, if you're just using your mind, you're like, oh really? That wasn't the same year. The NES Satellite came out in '89, right? That was the multi-tap, if you will, and it had the sensor. It wasn't the one that plugged in.
It was wireless.
Yeah.
It was the wireless sensor, the satellite, which is pretty cool because 4-player on the NES, that's badass,
Yeah.
So that came out in '89, and then also the Power Glove came out at the end of '89. Super close, in North America.
Yeah.
Super close to 90, but because the Power Glove came out, guess what came out following? The Wizard. The Wizard came out at the tail end of '89. The movie, everyone knows about it.
Yep.
And then also another staple for the NES that almost came out in '90 but didn't, Tetris.
Yeah.
So Tetris came out at the tail end of '89.
November, yep.
And then they waited a little bit, and then they released Dr. Mario. They're both on the same console, but Nintendo was like, we got to have our own puzzle game.
Yeah.
So that's, if you think about it, all that stuff that released, that's momentum going into '90.
But it's weird how in '90 then they kind of correct themselves in my mind with the NES Satellite because they released the Four Score, which is the multi-tap you want to have.
Yes,
the Satellite's cool and I own that, but if you're going to play 4-player games, you want the Four Score.
The Four Score. It's basically the same thing.
The Four Score.
It's basically the same thing, but it's just wired.
Yeah.
So that's really cool. You can do 4-player. It's really cool. And then they also released in '90 the game Genie,
which isn't a Nintendo product, but this is a big deal.
Yeah.
The game Genie comes out in 1990.
And you go, as a kid, what?
Yeah.
I can cheat my games?
And most people that are hardcore gamers, with the exception of Megadan29, who likes to cheat and shit when they play their games, don't really use a game Genie.
Yeah.
But when you were a kid, it was like, wait a minute, my neighbor has this thing that I can beat these games I've never been able to beat yet.
And also, you just were curious. You were just you just wanted to see what you could do.
Yeah.
You were like, whoa, this is cool.
And the commercials were just cool. And it's not really a device. I have one just for the sake of having one because it was so cool at the time, the marketing around it. It was like, holy shit, this is awesome. And I think everybody that sees a Game Genie logo from that time period knows what the hell's going on.
Well, and also it started in '90 and then they released it for multiple generations.
Yeah. I just think overall, man, it was a really interesting time that I wish I could go back to, and I wish I could be a little bit older. I was 4 years old in October of 1990.
I wish I could have been alive.
So for a good chunk of 90. You know, I'm 3, and you know, I was playing the NES. There's pictures of me, you know, as a 3-year-old playing the NES and things like that. But being in the minutia of what was going on would have been so different, and I wish I could have been there.
Yeah.
You know, I look at this lineup of games and I can't help but think what was going on in Nintendo and Nintendo of America's brain as in '89 the Genesis comes out.
Yeah, that's wild.
16 bits of power.
So like literally NES is releasing in 90 all these staples of games we just mentioned, but just before that the 16-bit era starts.
Yeah.
Like that's wild. Think about that. That's wild.
It is. And god dang, man, it's hard to say that anything released by the Genesis in '89 is better than Mario 3 and Super. Like, with less power, they were able to get games out that could compete with a console. The Genesis, in its own right, did amazing things.
Yeah, fantastic.
But they were just getting out of the starting blocks. Developers weren't quite there yet, so they could still kind of compete. All the while, Nintendo, in the background, not North America, but they released the Super Nintendo in Japan in November of 90.
Yeah, they released it in 90. So they released all these games in North America, and then in Japan with the Super Nintendo, and the Super Nintendo came out in 91.
And their primary focus or brain power is probably on the Super Nintendo development.
That's your new thing. You're gonna, but you're focusing on a new console and all this stuff, but then you're making Castlevania. I mean, obviously developers are.
Yeah.
Castlevania 3, freaking Mega Man 3, Dr. Mario.
Yeah.
Mario 3 came out. Like, you think you would just, nowadays, companies and stuff would save that and put it on the new console and stuff to sell the console.
They were keeping
the NES alive.
Yeah, they were, and it even bled into, I mean, I think we were talking before we filmed, you know, like the top loader I think drops in 93. So that's why we keep getting games in 94, which those are the ones that get expensive and crazy and all that stuff, and there's some great games that came out later in the NES life cycle. But I think 90 was the pocket. You know, I think if you were buying a console for the first time in 90, you were probably getting that orange Zapper action set.
Yep, the action set, which is such an iconic box.
Yep.
Such a great set, you know, it comes with the freaking Zapper.
Yeah, that was the one on the market. There's been tons of variants of the NES. You know, the control deck was still available and things like that, and some old stock of, you know, the one with the the power pad.
Yeah, I mean, you could, what's cool is like you could still get all the old stuff. So you could still go back and be like, oh, if I'm just now getting into the NES in 90, I can get Rob the Robot. I can get all these weird things.
Yeah.
And then all the games that came out in those past 5 years are still available.
Yep.
On top of the games that were coming out this year. So that's, man, I can't even imagine. You'd be just like, whoa.
With the box variants, I do want to like point out a thing that you would think Mario 3 coming out would have been packed in right away. That's not the case.
It wasn't. Yeah.
That pack-in bundle, the one that's sitting right behind me here, I don't think that came out till like 1993. I haven't fact-checked that, but that's just what I think, because of, I know we had to get a new NES, and I'm going off a picture that I have of me opening it on Christmas Day. We'll maybe flash that in the B-roll, or sitting under the Christmas tree, something like that has a date written on it. And I'm pretty sure our NES was so fucked up, man. You had to like put a game in, push it down, put a game on top, and like whatever. And so we got a second NES, but we didn't throw the old one out, so we both had one.
Oh,
that was pretty cool.
You were doing dual NESs.
Yeah,
that's really sick.
Yeah, so
that is wild to think that they didn't release. Like, Mario 3 is a staple.
Yeah.
You think they would have released that as a console bundle, because that's what you would do.
Yeah.
But back in the day, they were like, let's just release the game, and then they go, oh, the game's so popular, release it again with a Yeah.
So smart.
That's really smart.
Yeah.
You know, just, you gotta be patient sometimes.
Yeah, I think Nintendo was firing on all cylinders in 1990. They were hard at work on the Super Nintendo, and look at what they were doing on the NES.
It's insane to think about. What an incredible year, and this is just a snapshot. There's so many other games that were released on the NES that might be your favorites, you know, but it's insane to think about.
We picked out the ones that meant something to us, and you know, there are other great years on the console, but really I think for NES fans it's really hard to rival 1990 as a whole.
Yeah.
Your favorite game, you know, mine, Punch-Out, wasn't released in 90, but when you look at the whole year compared to this year, guys, it's really not close. We would love to know in the comment section below what was your favorite game released in 1990, and you better have a really strong take on what year was better than 1990, because I don't really think this is arguable. You know, I've heard people say that we spew things and expect people to believe them as facts. That's not true, but this is damn close to a fact.
It's, in our opinion, the best year of the NES. One of my favorite games of all time. It was on my top 10 list.
Yeah.
Dr. Mario.
Yeah.
1990.
Mario 3. You got Dr. Mario. You got Mario 3. You got Super C. I don't even really... Batman.
Castlevania 3. Mega Man 3. Double Dragon.
It's a tough
2.
one. Tough one to argue.
So many games.
Yeah.
It's absolutely insane. I wish I would have just been alive and coherent.
Yeah.
To even just be able to process it, because you would go, oh my god.
Yeah.
It's wild just to look at a year and be like, wow,
That all happened.
What a year.
I think it's safe to say 1990 was amazing, whether you agree it's the best or not. And I think it's safe to say all of us should raise our glass and say cheers to the NES and cheers to 1990. We'll catch you on the next episode of Gaming Off the Grid. Appreciate you.